Get in as possible. Lucy Allen.
Deputy Speaker, and it's a real pleasure to see you in your chair, and congratulations to the frontbench team on bringing forward this measure today. And it is a real delight to be standing in this place, welcoming it and supporting it with open arms. And there is a very good reason for this. It's an issue that has affected my constituents very deeply, and they have had to live with the consequences of the early release of a serious sexual offender just 5 years after he received a 22-year sentence for his role as a ringleader in a Telford child grooming case. He was convicted of controlling child sexual exploitation, trafficking for the purposes of child sexual exploitation, and the victims were as young as 13. This was organised child rape with a profit motive. The impact on the victims and their families and our wider community was such that I began to campaign assiduously for this very measure that we see before us today. And there are many ministers who I approached in the course of this campaign who I do not have time to pay tribute and give thanks to today, but I would like to say that the right honourable friend, the member for South Swindon, and of course the Prime Minister have done a fantastic job in leading the way on this issue. And as the Minister so rightly said, having done so early in this Parliament, having promised to have done so. And it is indeed a proud moment to be standing here to welcome this legislation. In December 2012, an 8-week trial led to a grooming gang leader being handed down a sentence of 22 years, of which 14 was to be served in custody and 8 on licence. And the victims had been put through an ordeal of an adversarial court case, had been rigorously cross-examined on their testimony and their character, and they felt that it was a price worth paying to know justice had been done. The community was able to breathe a sigh of relief, and victims and survivors and their families set about the process of rebuilding their lives. In this case, however, without it even being considered by the parole board, the offender was eligible for automatic early release just 5 years after the case had been sentenced. And it was because the 14 years in custody was cut in half to 7 years, and he had already been 2 years on remand pre-trial. The reaction locally was of shock and disbelief, and there was a sense the system had once again failed those who needed it most. The victims felt their experience had been trivialised and demeaned, and the community felt afraid the offender would return to Telford and would still be at risk to the public. No one in Telford could understand how this had happened, and I had no answer to give them. How could victims of serial child rape begin to build their lives again if the system failed to recognise the seriousness of the offences committed against them? Yes, there was anger, but the overriding sentiment was that who were these people in charge that they don't care about us? We're nothing. If the system doesn't work for people like us, what is the point of having a system at all? It made a mockery of justice. And there was absolutely no confidence in a system that would trivialise such serious crimes. What was particularly troubling in this case was the concept that the offender who had committed these crimes was going to be released on licence, and we should simply expect that he would adhere to his licence conditions, and therefore custody was not necessary. He did not adhere to his conditions, and fortunately for my community, he is now back in prison, having had a serious breach of those conditions, so serious that he is now serving all 22 years of the original sentence that was handed down. I just want to say that it's absolutely right this government has taken such prompt action on this issue, and to thank all those involved, Mr Speaker, for this and prioritising this, because it was in a manifesto and it was in a Queen's speech. My constituents are deeply grateful, and as I am, and it restores trust and confidence in our justice system and sends the right message to victims of sexual violence.